Before I start filming, can we just all pretend that this looks somewhat good? Hello. Large entertainment companies today are pumping out shows like they're going out of business, but it's actually doing the exact opposite. It's kind of remarkably lucrative. They're capitalizing on hit movies and TV shows, creating sagas, sequels, prequels, reboots, and Christmas specials. The IP I was most afraid of spin-offs for was Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is literally my favorite show ever made. It's the type of show that I try not to watch a lot so that in like 6 years I kind of forget what happened and I can watch it again with somewhat of a fresh experience. That being said, I've watched the entire show 3 times since it finished. I didn't read the books. I don't read. I've heard they're really good. I'd never experienced a show where I fall so deeply in love with these 3-dimensional characters that are so vulnerable to death at any moment. The world George R.R. Martin created was just so real and explicit in almost every aspect. The environments, the world building, the cities and crowds, the graphic violence, the romance, even the language, everything was so convincing, which is important in a medieval fantasy show. I mean, how many times have you felt ridiculous explaining Game of Thrones to somebody?
It's this medieval show about knights and dragons and a zombie army coming from a magical ice wall and...
Look man, I'm good. I'm gonna go watch Succession. And then there's the phenomenal acting that introduced me to so many amazing actors like Charles Dance.
Go on, say something clever.
You are a Lannister.
The character motivations were so clear and believable, no matter how twisted they were. And the show didn't hide from that. It didn't hide from man's dark desires, like power, sex, money, prideful legacy, and revenge, showing how every human is susceptible. There was constant tension building up with real stakes on the line and brutal consequences. And the pacing between character story arcs was so exciting besides boring-ass training with Arya. Yes, season 8 was disappointment. I agree with a lot of the criticisms, especially regarding like logic and plot holes. Season 8 did leave a bitter aftertaste in my mouth for any future Game of Thrones projects. And one more small thing that kind of hurt the hype around this show, I saw a bunch of press clips with House of Dragon producers and actors being asked what they were most excited for the audience to see in the new show. And every one of them, like it was rehearsed, was like, the dragons, of course, there's so many cool dragons. Like the audience is a bunch of 10-year-olds that are getting excited over monster trucks. And monster trucks are sick. But I think everybody's on the same page when it comes to wanting better characters and writing more than colorful dragons first and foremost. I was just scared for my Game of Thrones. I fucking love this show. It felt like Game of Thrones again. It's not perfect, and we'll get into that. Of course, there's gonna be an onslaught of comparisons between Game of Thrones and HOD, but let me take you on an adventure through the episodes and explain what I mean. Episode 1. I immediately noticed the good writing even in the language. When I heard the first good morrow, I was like, helleth yeah. The acting overall is just great, and it was the first thing that I checked off the box as far as the show being convincing. I will say the white hair wigs definitely took a solid minute to not look distracting.
Probably how it is right now on my head.
In the first episode, we get to see a tournament where they get to show off some of that sweet, sweet combat that we love in Game of Thrones. And I like what I saw. And more than I like what I saw, I like what I heard. The sound design is bang on. The bass coming from the impacts. I mean, it's definitely a little exaggerated, but how sick does this sound? I like all the little small details you can spot too that kind of show how treacherous the world of Game of Thrones is, like council members betting on the defeat of another council member's son. By the way, I had to rewatch the show to write this video, and I totally forgot Daemon kicks the shit out of Otto Hightower's eldest son. That's him. We're introduced to Daemon as the commander of the City Watch, and he hangs out with Rhaenyra, gives her a necklace. Nothing weird there. We then have our first of many long and intensely graphic pregnancy scenes. Like, I get it, the season's about family and showing how powerful birthright is, so they're putting some strong emphasis on the difficulty of childbirth bringing royalty into the world. But as a 26-year-old American dude that has no children, can I just say, it's a bit much. And if you don't agree with me, that's fine, but I think we can all agree there's one scene near the end, and if you've watched the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that takes the pregnancy scenes to a whole new level, but we'll get there. I love how at the end of the first episode, they made their first classic Game of Thrones dark twist, with the shot of Emma's body wrapped up, panning down to a smaller body right beneath it, showing how the king's sacrificial choice was in vain. The The king chooses Alicent to be his new wife, which pisses off Rhaenyra because it's her friend, her potential gay lover, and now competitor to the throne if Alicent has kids. Like, don't fuck my dad, dude. After episode 2, I was pretty much on board for the show. But episode 3, as exciting as it sounds on paper, actually started to have me concerned for the show. Episode 3. We have our first substantial time jump where you can see that Alicent has had baby Aegon and baby Aemond is on the way. We're introduced to a few new characters like Mikey Day, aka Larys Strong. Seems like a pretty nice dude. My issue with this episode started with some of the writing becoming a little tropish, like Jason Lannister being the typical rich privileged douche. Rhaenyra doesn't want to get married so she rebels and runs away. Viserys gets drunk because his daughter's such a headache. I also just think his drunk acting is a little overdone. Rhaenyra kills a boar and keeps on stabbing it, getting blood everywhere to show her rage and angst. And then Daemon beats a messenger when he gets good news from his brother that he's willing to help him in the battle. I feel like I've seen variations of those scenes hundreds of times in other movies and TV shows. My biggest issue with the episode was the final battle at the Stepstones. The setup is Daemon and the Velaryons have been losing a battle against the crab feeder, this ghoul in a cave, for years on end. But Daemon pulls the classic, I'm surrendering, psych, gotcha, and takes on an army, cutting down like 50 dudes who are sent to him one at a time. And this army he's been losing to with hundreds of archers can't hit one fucking guy. Like, a big theme of this video is Game of Thrones needs to be convincing. Is this scene convincing? Absolutely not. And then even more cheap than that was when he finally gets to the crab feeder, we don't even see the fight scene and he just comes out with half of a corpse. It felt just like when Snoke dies in The Last Jedi, like this big old villain that's all this build up and then just zero payoff. And one last thing, the dragons look amazing, but the dragon riding scenes look pretty rough. So at this point, I'd become wary of the show again. With those concerns top of mind, I plunged into episode 4. There's a lot of juiciness in this episode, and I'm gonna regret using that word here in a second. Daemon and Rhaenyra start catching up. You know, it's been a few years. They start talking in that sexy elven language. And later that night, Daemon invites her to sneak out with him. I won't lie, I really did not believe there to be any romantic intentions behind this. It may have been obvious to some people, but I had that whole he's my uncle thing fogging my imagination. But then I saw that handhold and I was like, what's going on here? I think the director, Claire Kilner, did an amazing job here showing the perspective of Rhaenyra going to the brothel. It captured that mixture of unsureness but slight excitement being exposed to the adult world for the first time. It felt like the first time I went to like a cool kids party in high school growing up. Like, oh fuck dude, there's beer here? Yo, there's hookah? I didn't know we were doing hardcore drugs tonight. Things heat up and boom, Daemon and Rhaenyra start making out. Yeah. Hot as hell.
Ew,
what?
gross.
Oh my, loosen up. Everybody's thinking it. But seriously, everybody that was watching this was freaking out when it happened. Those people being my family, so as cool and hot as this scene was, a little bit of the fun was sucked out of the room because I was sitting next to my mother. What I respect is that they didn't choose the classic angle of, ugh, Daemon was a dick, now I hate all men. It was more like, yo, I just had my sexual awakening, I'm still revved up, I'm in a castle full of good looking dudes, Kristen Cole, you get over here, son. The flirting was so damn cute, and Cole's subtle hesitations like, holy shit, am I really doing this right now? Was so believable. I don't know, maybe I'm a little too single and my bias is getting the best of me, but I love this whole sequence. Back on board with House of Dragon. Sex! Woo! Episode 5. Episode 5 is where things start to get a bit confusing, like my hair. Otto briefly explains Alicent's kids will most likely be killed if Rhaenyra takes the throne, because everybody in the kingdom will think that Alicent's firstborn, Aegon, has the right to the throne, not a woman, and this division could cause a war. What was hard to understand for me though was, we had an episode where everybody was cool with Rhaenyra taking over and swearing their banners to her, so the threat doesn't feel as pressing as Otto makes it seem. There's a new hand of the king now, Lionel Strong, also the father of Harwin and Larys. And the time jump gets a little bit odd here, because it's like, wait. Lionel Strong is these two guys' dad? Why do they all look 34? But I love this jolly fellow. He has an honest heart, which means he's gonna die in the next couple of hours. I don't know how Rhaenyra knows that Sir Lanner's gay, but she does, and they agree to an open relationship. Cole hears about the arrangement and isn't too pleased, and he goes with the pouty approach to woo her, which in my experience, doesn't usually work. And he also does that weird youth pastor breathe in before every line.
So Lena is a good and decent man.
He gets rejected. He tattles on himself to Alicent, and Alicent now views Rhaenyra not as just a liar, but as some would call a horror. Episode 6. The most jarring time jump happens here, 10 years ahead where most of the main characters are swapped out. To give a quick recap on the families currently, Alicent has 2 blonde boys and an odd blonde girl. Rhaenyra has 2, now 3, brown-haired white boys, so everyone speculates that she's been having children out of wedlock, which she has. And Alicent is pissed because everybody in the kingdom has to pretend like they are his children when it's as obvious as the sky is blue that they aren't. So they don't have a right to the throne. While her son, Aegon, is technically the rightful heir to the throne, being Viserys' first male heir. Now I was partially confused here. Let me take a moment to make my case. On paper, some of these motivations make sense, but what I wasn't convinced of is that Alicent is so desperate to have her son get on the throne. She hasn't struck me as the yearning for power type, you know? You could make a case that it's Otto's influence making her this way, and I'm aware that Otto and Alicent believe that Rhaenyra will most likely kill her children when she gets on the throne, but I just don't see Rhaenyra doing that to her childhood best friend and technically queen grandmother. I don't know, am I crazy for not feeling this primal fear that Alicent seems to be having at this point in the show? And then this next part really confused the shit out of me. Larys Strong has dinner with Alicent and she barely utters the words, "I wish my dad were the hand again." So Larys hires criminals, which by the way, one of them totally looks like Otto Hightower. Was anybody else confused for a minute thinking that that was Otto Hightower? And the bad bees go to Harrenhal, which is where his brother and father are, and they burn the place to the ground and kill his whole family. What? They just activated Larys' villain aspect out of nowhere. He just kills his kind father and brother who we've seen him get along with.
See? You see? Well, you don't see it?
They're talking shit together. I just wish there was a little bit more oomph behind why he did that. Maybe emphasizing his family's condescending view on him. I feel you will reward me when the time is right. Or she could have you hung because you're clearly a lunatic with morals as crooked as your fucking bent leg. Episode 7. Everybody starts together for Daemon's wife's funeral. Aegon is betrothed to his sister. Sick. Luke seems to be the next Jon Snow when it comes to inheriting Driftmark.
I don't want it.
And then Rhaenyra and Daemon end up hooking up. Hot as hell.
Still?
Yeah, come on.
Disgusting.
Episode 8. This is the final time jump, and 6 years have passed where all the kids are much older, and I think they have their final actors now. Rhaenyra has had 2 kids with Daemon.
And got busy!
With another on the way. Corlys, the sea snake, the king black dude with the white hair, has been brought to near death. So his brother, Vaemon, believes he has a right to the throne over Lucerys. And the king isn't part of this debate because he's so fucking old. Vaemon makes his case for being the head of Driftmark and does it so aggressively that he gets half of his head cut off for it. And Aemond now has a new role model. Then there's this heartwarming family gathering until Aemond has some pig PTSD and starts a brawl in the middle of it. But after things settle down, it seems like Rhaenyra and Alicent are actually starting to make peace. But then, that night, Viserys has to open his damn zombie mouth and tell Alicent Aegon is supposed to be king. Thinking he was talking to Rhaenyra, referring to Rhaenyra's Aegon. Since everybody in the show names their kid the same thing or something that rhymes with it, Alicent thinks she is talking about her Aegon and takes it as royal decree that Aegon is now the official heir to the throne. And then the king finally kicks the bucket. Episode 9. The king is dead. Alicent tells Otto about how Aegon is supposed to be king, and instantly the Hightower's plan of action comes into play, which seems to have been undergoing for quite some time. Cole has another temper tantrum and kills one of the council members who's against the plan, and the GOAT Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Harold Westerling, calls out Cole and is requested by Otto to go kill Rhaenyra, Daemon, and their family. But he gives Otto the old middle finger until this council gets some moral decency, or a king. And then Aegon is missing, so there's 2 teams that form, Otto's and Alicent's. Aemond and Cole, and Eric and Arik. That's Eric and Arik. Yes, those are seriously the names for a pair of twins they put in this show, as if the names in the show couldn't get more confusing. Eric and Arik, for the people. Aegon, Aemond, Vaemond, Rhaenys, Rhaenyra, Rhaena. Come on, Martin, you know what you're doing. I'm confused as shit over here. Eric squared finds Aegon first, but I'm surprised that Arik ends up kind of turning his back on Eric. Or vice versa. You'd think they'd be on the same page about everything. At the same time, 2 badass twins on opposite ends of the blade? Pfft, I know how this turns out. I've seen the Sacrifice trailer for Knights of the Old Republic. It's gonna be sick. And we find out that Larys has a regular foot fetish deal with Alicent. Aegon doesn't want to be king, but when he sees that the whole city is welcoming him as king, you can see that he kind of likes it. Episode 10. Daemon and Rhaenyra find out that the king is finally dead and that Alicent and the Greens have betrayed her. again. Rhaenyra starts having her baby, and this is where that insane pregnancy scene I was talking about starts, and takes it a little way too far. Long story short, whole lot of dead baby action. Like, my lord. Daemon and Rhaenyra need allies, so they send Jace and Luke, alone for some reason, to go and convince other houses. Luke goes to Storm's End, while Jace goes to Winterfell. Stark Nation, baby, land of the free, home of the brave! Luke runs into Aemond at Storm's End with his pretty-ass White Walker eye. Luke shows up empty-handed and has nothing to offer the Lord there, so he runs away, and Aemond chases right after him in what seems to be an intimidation tactic, but ends up going with a total annihilation tactic, killing him and his dragon. And that ends the first season of House of Dragon. Well done. It's not the most grand finale, but freaking love the show. I'm really excited to see where the show is heading. Like I said in the beginning of this video, my expectations for this show were on the floor, and yet it totally captivated me. Did it convince me that it's as good as the original Game of Thrones? Not yet, and I'm not saying that to discredit it. There is something missing in the show, and I believe that problem is the world building, which they can fix with time. The show is convincing in a lot of ways, but I find the world to feel very small. Even if you look at the map of Westeros, we've been in this tiny little area mainly surrounding King's Landing. Also, looking at the map, I never realized that Dragonstone is like down the street from King's Landing. And I also didn't know that the north was so freaking huge. And I don't really understand why they're so concerned with the stepstones. I mean, like, maybe it's trade with Dorne. We're basically just in castles around King's Landing the entire first season. And that's intentional, that's what the season is about, is those families starting. But now that we have that ground floor made, I really hope that the show opens up, especially with Jace heading to the north and Daemon and Rhaenyra needing allies. The other day I just watched a random episode of the original Game of Thrones, and in one episode it featured Tywin talking to the Rose Grandma in King's Landing. There was another scene where Jon Snow was climbing the wall, and the next scene was like catching up with the Hound and Arya in the middle of nowhere. Like, how cool is that? The world felt huge. I think partially due to the varying environments, but I also think it's just due to the fact that you see other people around and interact with other people that aren't the main characters. Like, they need more of a population. There's like 3 scenes in the entire season of House of Dragon that feature like a crowd or people walking around in the city or town, which really hurts the magnitude behind becoming king. As the audience, it's like, what do you even get when being king besides sitting at the head of the council table? I think another reason why the world has felt small is dragons. As cool as dragons are, I really thought we weren't going to see Luke get to Stormhold until the next season. But nope, 10 minutes later he's there. They just kind of got to be careful with it because so much of Game of Thrones fun is based around the adventure of exploring Westeros. And if you make everything seem like it's a blink of an eye away, it's gonna make the whole world feel small and that like nothing really happens outside of those main areas. Like in Game of Thrones, getting from Winterfell to King's Landing takes like half of a season and you get to see all this like bandits and wildlife and like how people used to travel back in medieval days. It's super immersive. In the original, you got to live in and experience the world of Game of Thrones, not just the royalty. And with that, I wish the best of luck to the cast and crew on season 2, and thanks for watching. Oh, that feels so good. Been sitting in this chair for like 4 hours.